hopefully it'll get tuned by the time Cam's out of jail. We can give it back and not die.
Not my gearbox
Not
hand.
a fan, eh?
And that's like right where you'd hit it after you go over a speed bump too. We'll make that Cam's problem.
Car's dropped off. We've just filled it up with so much fuel it's running out the spout. It's idling, it's working, so once they get that tune done, we'll come down and film the glory shot.
Power runs.
Like in the movies.
We have taken the car down to our mates Andrew and Michael at Alan Blair Automotive, who are local here in Noosa. The Nova is strapped down onto the dyno and Michael connects up the necessary tuning tools such as the wideband O2 sensor. Once everything is in place, Michael sets up the dyno computer and fires up the Haltech software. He then starts tuning the Nova from idle and slowly applies more load to the engine while taking data logs and can adjust the tune to suit before getting into any power runs. Michael refits the air cleaner, which was originally removed as it was thought to be choking the engine, but after another power run, it was confirmed that it didn't affect it at all.
All good.
With the tune sorted, Michael rolls the car off the dyno and the Nova is ready to be picked up and taken back to the SKID factory.
Welcome back, Alan.
It's pretty choppy.
Pretty choppy. Sounds sick, eh?
Yeah, it's alright.
Drives nice.
Pretty good for an old girl. It's hot in there.
Nice day for a drive back, eh?
Yeah, it could do with some air conditioning, but it's alright otherwise. It drives pretty nice. It's It was a bit of a challenge to get the tune right, which I'll go into in a little bit. But it is good to go now. Might need a few little tweaks here and there for the idle control and stuff like that. We had a problem with the idle control motor on the Holly throttle body, which just did not work, and is also not the same as every other stepper motor that looks exactly like that. So we had to actually buy it from Holly, from the States. So we've got a new one and it works. Just needs a bit of tweaking here and there. The stepper motors can be pretty finicky with Haltex, just to get the settings right, because even though you can set the steps, each motor has a different valve size, which means there's different amounts of air passing through. So we'll have a play with that anyway. It just was more just to get it back and check it over and make sure everything is working okay, because it is kind of a new car as far as driveline and stuff goes. All the wiring's new. There's a couple of little niggles with the wiring that Az has got to sort out for us when he comes back. Nothing unexpected. It is a pretty big job to rewire a car, and things can go wrong or get missed, so we'll just sort it out. It's just part of the job. You've got to get things working before you can tell whether they work properly. So you can't just go, oh, I think I did that right, it must be sweet, because it doesn't work that way. So I can't remember how much power it made. I think it was like a bit over 300 horsepower at the wheels, which is nowhere near enough for a standardish LS1 with a cam. Most American cars with these mods would probably make about 600 horsepower, but in Australia they don't, because we have dynos that read properly. First impressions for me are it's got plenty of power for the car, because the car is not very heavy and it's old. So as far as cruising car goes, you touch the throttle this much and it just goes. The transmission actually works pretty good. Could probably use a bit of tweaking to suit this engine. Probably shifts up a bit early. But that's a whole other story. That and the diff wasn't in the brief, so we'll have to leave that.
Do you think the auto may be something to do with the power figure?
Quite likely it is, but I don't think that power figure is unreasonable anyway. Like, I don't want to set the internet on fire, but a 5.7 litre engine with a camshaft does not make 450 horsepower at the wheels. You've got to have a lot more stuff going on than that for it to work. You've got to be revving the shit out of it, or have really high compression, all those things. So this was never meant to be any of those things. It's just got a big choppy cam in it because it makes it sound cool. And that it does. It does sound great. It drives nice. It's got a presence, like people are staring at you all the time if that's what you're into. That's certainly happening. Somewhere along the lines we fixed the brakes because they didn't really work very well. They had no booster. We found out that the one-way valve was bugging in the booster, so I just swapped one out for another, probably the one that came with the engine from the Commodore, because it's actually still the same. And now they work, which is great, because it probably does need brakes. Cooling wise, everything's perfect. I mean, this is all standard. This is all standard Commodore stuff, which has got a lot more weight and load on everything than this car has. So that all works fine.
You mentioned air conditioning. What's happening with the aircon?
Nothing is happening with the aircon. That's a future cam problem. Problems with getting it tuned is probably down to this thing that is far too close to an actual carby for my liking. The problem with it is it does suffer the same issues that carburetors suffer with big camshafts and that sort of thing when they're cold. There's manifold wetting problems, all that stuff that is the reason why you have port injection, is because it removes all those things. This retains those issues, albeit there's a bit better control. It's easier to control because you just do it from a laptop rather than changing jets. And it's got idle control, which is great.
obviously the ignition system works a lot better because it's got an ECU running that as well, which even if you put a carburetor on this, which you could take that off and put a carby on it if you wanted to and it'd still run. You still have to run a computer to run the ignition system. So it never made any sense to me to use a carby and then have a computer for the ignition when you should be running both with that. So I probably knew that this was going to happen, but we just got this with the engine, and it sort of went along with the concept of the build, which was we wanted it to look like it was original and had a carby, which it does. It's pretty good. Lots of people have stuck their head in it and had no idea.
It does look bloody nice. Let's not lie about that.
So there's a little bit of stuff that you got to fiddle around with. We're running it with a Haltech. The ECU that probably comes with this, Holly's, people say Holly's self-tune themselves, which is like, that doesn't happen. They have feedback learning, but you can't, it has to have a tune in it to begin with. And I suspect that Holly engineers have done that, and they've set up their software so you can make changes by changing the camshaft profile types in your and your capacity and stuff like that. So that's the way they've attacked it. By all accounts, it works pretty well, but that's not what we're using. So this particular thing, we had bulk problems with it just flooding the engine when you're cranking it, because the 4 injectors are just squirting at each other in through underneath the throttle plate, which isn't great for atomization. And just a lot of settings in the ECU. 99% of the time you're going to run that ECU on a port injected engine, so the base settings were set up for that, so we just had to sort of plow through it and find out why it was doing that. And I just sort of halved a bunch of settings to do with starting, and that sort of sorted it out. We went through a few plugs in the meantime though, so it was a bit of a pain. This stuff happens. If you're not doing the same thing that everyone does all the time, like putting this in with a plastic manifold on and a factory ECU that you just flash in a map that's been done 10,000 times, run it up, see if it's all right, and then send it out the door. This is not the same as that. So you've got to expect problems because you're changing things from the norm. So I can't say I didn't expect it, but it was still a pain. One other problem we had was I messed up that exhaust manifold. I probably clicked my finger too quick, and I just painted myself into a corner with it, and I've got a lead burning, which is the golden rule of making headers is make them so the leads burn. So I broke my own rule, and the punishment for that is that I have to make that again, and I'm going to do that before Cam picks the car up. I got the header flanges and stuff. Part of the reason why it happened was because, again, going back to the start of this build, I foolishly thought that this Gen 3 small block would just fit, because they mostly do. But in this car, this specific car, we couldn't put the engine in without moving it forward, because there's a difference in the back of the block between the Gen 1 and the Gen 3. They've basically shaved off 2 inches of bell housing area on the LS engine to make it more compact. So to us, that equaled it hitting the firewall. So we had to actually move the engine forward, which every other Chevy that's twice the size of this, you probably would never have to do that because they're so big. So that was a problem. Hindsight, I wish I had have just mounted the engine myself and put it in the middle, because it is heavily offset to one direction because of this car was never meant to have a V8 in it. They sort of threw it in there later on because that's what they did in the 60s, more power. And the steering box is so big that they couldn't fit the exhaust manifolds in, even though they were the most basic ram-torn sort of manifolds. So they've just offset the engine, and by a considerable amount. So we left it like that at the time because we thought we were going to run the headers out underneath, but it ended up that we couldn't do it. Like there was just no room to put the headers out. So hindsight says if we knew we were going to put them out through the fender wells, I would have just centered the engine, because this side has got tons of room, this side's got no room. I've got some serious bends trying to keep the headers away from the strut tower, which no other Chevy has. They've all just got normal front ends. So there's a lot of just anomalies with this particular vehicle, and I can hear the comment section just ablaze with the friction of people's fingers on the keyboard right now, saying you should have just put a whole front clip in it. And yeah, that's great, but it's not my car, and that costs money, and we couldn't do that. There was no money for it. It wasn't going to get done. And it also would be illegal in Australia to just completely remove the entire front of the car and put a whole new one on it that was made by some dudes in California. You would have to have everything x-rayed. You'd have to have it like we have legality issues with everything in Australia. Boo-hoo for us. That's just how it is. So there was a whole bunch of things rolling on that I wish I had have thought about it a bit harder in the start of it. Normally when I do an engine conversion, I do a lot of research beforehand, and I don't take any notice to what anyone else says, because most of the time they don't know what they're doing, or they're willing to accept things that shouldn't be accepted. And for some reason I just didn't do that, because this was supposed to be an easy fit because it's a Gen 1 versus Gen 3 small block, so it sort of should have just went in there. So I've learnt some lessons from this car. What should have been easy and simple because it's just a straight fit, it didn't turn out to be. So, like, I've done jobs that were putting stupid engines into cars where they don't fit, and they were easier to do because we just did it with a clean sheet instead of trying to follow a sort of a formula, as it were. So lessons learnt. We'll fix the headers, do a bit of wiring work, make sure that's okay, get rid of those blue fittings because they suck. Cooling's great, engine runs great, mechanically the engine's great, the transmission seems to be fine. It's probably going to blaze one wheel everywhere because it hasn't got a limo in it, but that's okay. The brakes work better now, that's great too. So all in all, just a couple of little things to fix up, and this happens. When you're doing a build like this, you're quite often going to, unless you've done it 10 times before exactly the same way, you're going to have to redo some things or rethink them after the fact, because when you put it into operation, it may not be the same as what you imagined in your head. So we'll get it sorted for Cam, and get it back to him, and hopefully he'll love it.
Maybe cut some hot laps, eh?
Yeah, we could do that.
Do you like hot laps?
Not really. It's not really my thing. I prefer to work on cars. You can do it.